Hi, this is Steve with HomeStrung Jewelry, and today I'm going to show you how to make this perfectly knotted pearl bracelet using only a needle, a thread, your hands, and a traditional toolless knotting technique that anyone can learn and begin using right away. Materials you're going to need. First off, you're going to need pearls. We'll talk about those a little later on. And then in addition to that, you're going to need some sort of a beading thread. And in the past, I've used various things, but today we're going to be using a synthetic. And it comes in all different colors. And I think in order to make it show up better, we're going to use a pink today. On top of that, you're going to need a clasp, and I'm just going to use a toggle clasp. And then you're going to need something called bullion, French wire, or gimp. And we'll again talk about that in a few minutes. Now, in addition to the materials that we're going to be using, you're going to need certain tools. The main tool you're going to need is some sort of a cutter that will cut the thread. I'm using the Cuda scissors. You could use anything else. I'm going to use a separate cutter though also to cut the bullion, because you want a good clean cut on this coiled wire. And I just used a real good fine tip pair of scissors. You could use flush cutters. You're going to need, because I'm using a synthetic thread, I'm also going to be using a thread burner to help me cut and finish off the ends. You're going to need ruler or rulers. I like the metal ruler for the really fine stuff, and the larger ruler just for measuring, keeping track of what I'm doing. And then you're going to need, I usually keep a pair of chain nose pliers around in case I need to grab something like the end of a wire coming through a pearl. And then probably most importantly, and I hope you can see this, is a pearl beading needle. And these are really, really thin, really small. You don't want to drop them because they will just completely disappear into a carpet, sometimes into a bead mat. But these are just wonderful to work with for pearl knotting. Now to start with, let's talk about the size thread that you're going to need. Pearls, generally speaking, have a very small hole, which is why we like this little tiny needle. But you're going to be tying knots, and you want to make sure that the thread is big enough that the knot that you tie will not pull through the pearl. At the same time, for the technique I'm going to be doing today, I'm using a double strand, but you're going to need to go through the pearl and then come back again. So you want to make sure that the thread is also thin enough that it will pass through the pearl twice. And so what we're going to do is, I've got a little piece of scrap cording here, or thread, and I'm going to thread it into the pearl, and I've tied a knot in the end, and we're going to pull it through to make sure that that's just an overhand knot. We want to make sure that it doesn't pull through, and I'll give it a little tug, because when you wear your pearls, it's definitely going to get tugged. But you can see that knot is not pulling through. At the same time, we want to take the needle and run it back through the hole in the pearl, because we want to make sure that we can get two sets of strands through the pearl comfortably, and you can see it pulls right through. In fact, we can pull it right through the pearl. So this particular thread that I'm using right here is, and you'll need to know the dimension of your thread. This one is 0.2 millimeters is the diameter of the thread, and I usually keep several different diameters of thread here because some smaller pearls sometimes have smaller holes. Bigger pearls may have a bigger pool, or a bigger hole. So anyway, so we've checked that. Now we're going to want to take our thread, and I usually recommend, and what I'm going to be doing today is doing a bracelet, and I recommend bracelets for new pearl knotters just because it's a little easier to deal with a shorter strand. of pearls, especially when you're starting out. There's less chance of things getting tangled up. And so I like to do that. And I'm going to be doing a bracelet that will fit Debbie, who takes about she has about a 6.5, 6 3/4 inch wrist. But because of the size of the pearls, it'll extend out a little bit. And so I'm going to take off 3/4 of an inch for the clasp, or almost an inch for the clasp, and with the gimp. And so we're going to be making a knotted strand of pearls that's about 6 3/4 inches long. And so generally speaking, what I do is I pull about 5 times the length of cord that I'm going to need, and then I add a little bit extra, particularly for a bracelet. And a lot will depend too on how many knots you're going to be tying. If you're using small pearls, you're going to be tying more knots, which is going to use up more thread if they're really big. And so 5 to 6 times is usually a good guideline. You want to make sure you don't run out. And so we're looking at roughly 7 inches. 5 times that is 35 inches. And so we're going to pull about a yard of thread here out. And I'm just going to eyeball this. I've done this long enough, and I always add extra. Remember, thread is cheap. And if you have to, you run out of thread and you have to either start over or extend it, it just isn't worth the time and the effort. And I'm using the wrong shears. I should be using my special Cuda shears. And I like these little tiny ones because they're a little smaller. I have a bigger set of Cuda shears, but these are thinner and I can get into tighter spots with it. So I like these, and I'll put a link down in the description if you're interested in these. So there is our thread. And now we're going to take our needle. And just a quick word about thread. I do like to use silk thread and have used it a lot in the past, but my favorite silk thread company went out of business a number of years ago. And I just haven't found another one that I like as well. This is the Gudebrat, which is an old American company, and it's just a very, very soft thread. I have some personal stock that I keep for if I need a special necklace or bracelet that I want to tie in silk. But we're going to be using synthetics, which is my preferred is a spectral line, which is used in a lot of fishing lines. And what I'm using today is Hercules thread, which we've talked about in the past, and I will put links down below as well. This is a 20-pound. It's stronger than silk for its size. And silk, generally speaking, before you do the knotting, you need to stretch the thread, which it's really hard to do that consistently. You don't have to do that with the synthetics. The synthetics are also easier to keep clean. They hold up, longer periods of time. As I said, they don't stretch and don't need to be restrung as often. You don't get the gaps between the knots that you will get sometimes with that. And it's a little easier to work with if you're brand new to knotting pearls, so I suggest this. Next, let's talk about the needle. Okay, let me see if I can get it in here so you can see it. This needle it's actually a twisted wire, a very, very fine wire. And in an emergency, I have used like 40 gauge wire and made my own needles. But these are about 2.5 inches long, twisted wire. They do get bent up a lot. As I said, if you drop it, you're probably going to completely lose it. So keep track of it. And as quickly as possible after I pull the thread, I will go ahead and put the thread through the eye in the needle, and that way I'm not going to lose the needle. And we go to the end of the thread, and I just tie a quick overhand knot in the end of the thread, just so as I'm threading the pearls on, they don't slip off the end. There we have our little knot. And the very first thing that we're going to do is, well, let's get our pearls ready. I'm going to cut this strand and pull off the first 3 pearls. Now, the pearls that I'm using today, these are a white potato pearl. They have rings on them. I mean, this is not a AAA pearl by any means, but it has some beautiful luster. I, generally speaking, you hear in grading diamonds about the 4 C's. Well, there's actually 6 different points for grading pearls, and one of the most important is luster. You want a good luster. I mean, you can use whatever pearls you want, but you want something that reflects, preferably almost like a mirror, and completely covers the pearl. If you move the pearl around and it kind of winks at you bright and dull, that's going to be a lower quality pearl. I don't mind the rings. I think they add a nice feature, but they do mean that these are not a AAA graded pearl, and these are about 7 to 8 millimeters. But we will begin by putting the first 3 pearls, and we're not going to tie any knots on these first 3, at least not here initially. So we'll put those 3 pearls on, and we will pull the thread through until we take them to the end there by the knot. And again, the knot there doesn't, the only purpose it serves is to keep the pearls from going off of the end. And so there are our 3 pearls. And the next thing we're going to talk about is this thing we call French wire, or gimp, or bullion. And I've got 2 different colors here. It's literally a coil of wire. If you can look, you can see it's hollow. And it's a very, very fine wire that's been coiled. And we use this to protect the thread when we hook it to the clasp. The clasps are generally metal of some sort, and there's a lot of abrasion that can occur between the clasp and the thread, and it will eventually wear out the thread. By adding on the French wire, the gimp, the bullion, it protects the thread and makes it last longer. And it also has become kind of a signature thing for high quality strands of pearls. So I always use it when I'm doing it. It comes in different sizes. This particular one is a 0.8 millimeter, which is also 20 gauge. You can see it listed either way. In the past, I've worked almost exclusively with French wired gimp or bullion. All 3 are names that are recognizable. I've worked only with sterling silver or vermeil. Vermeil is a sterling silver wire that has been gold plated, so that it's, even though it's plated in gold, it's a little less expensive, but it is silver underneath. So, but it's gotten horribly expensive. In fact, I have an old container here that I picked up, gosh, close to 20 years ago, and you can see it's 27 inches for $2.52. I went to the same supplier, and today this same thing would cost $10. And the vermeil costs even more. I think it's like $3.50, and you only get like 18, 19 inches. So today we're going to be using something that's plated on a base metal, but it works perfectly fine. Now we're going to only be using, in the past I've told people, and I'm going to be using the gold. In the past I've told people to use about 1/4 of an inch of gimp, but it actually depends upon the size of the clasp that you're going to be using. And this clasp is pretty good size. It's a little bigger, and plus, because again, you're all new to this, I'm going to give you a little wiggle room. And so I'm going to use my fine tip scissors, and I'm going to go in and cut this at about 3/8 of an inch. And you might as well cut the second one at the same time for the other end. And you want to make sure you don't crush the gimp, otherwise it will close it off and you won't be able to thread anything through it. But you can see I've got, and it is really small and hard to hold, But you can see I've got this little tiny tube made from a coil of wire. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take the end of my needle, and you can see that needle's already getting a little distorted, and don't worry about that. We're going to put it through the hole in the gimp until the needle comes out the other end. And we're working with really thin stuff here, just a little bigger than, than a thick hair. So I know it's hard to see, but we're going to take this and run it down to where it meets the cord. Now, if you try to pull this on at this point, it will stretch out this little coil of wire and it will mess it up. And so what you need to do is I take my thumb and my finger and I squeeze pretty firmly onto that length of gimp and then pull the needle through, pulling up on the thread, and you can see there's the gimp onto the thread. And we're going to run this gimp now all the way down, and I'm holding it again because you don't want it to get all malformed, stretch out, or scrunch together, either one, or you won't have a really nice finish. And apparently this is a fairly messing up the coil of wire, this gimp, because I've seen one of the leading pearl suppliers in the country. I blew up one of his finished necklaces, and the gimp was a little messed up on his. So if you can just master this, you're going to have something over even the best of the necklace and bracelet makers in this country. So you can see the gimp, I'm keeping it about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch away from the first pearl. And what we're going to do now is, now I know traditionally a lot of people like to use the fish hook clasp for pearls, but I'm not a traditionalist. I like to use whatever looks good, and so I'm going to use this heart toggle today for this bracelet. But you take your thread through 1/2 of the toggle, and we're going to run it down until it sits there close to the gimp, and we're going to take our needle Notice, like I said, I've got the gimp a little ways away from the pearl because I don't want it to get in the way as I thread the needle back through the pearl. There we go. I'm used to being right on top of this, but the camera is kind of in the way. Okay, and see, there's the problem I've got there. The gimp is pulled up against the pearl, and I can't get the thread through. So let's pull that away a little bit. There we go. I've got tools and all sorts of things in the way. So we're going to pull this thread. Through until we've just got a real basic loop here. And we can now pull the I've got the clasp sitting on the gimp, and you're going to work both ends of the cord. And we're just going to pull that tight so that we form this little loop of wire. And there we have it. So now you've got the gimp protecting the cord where it attaches to the clasp. Okay, and we're ready for our first knot. Now these first couple of pearls, we're going to work over the top of the thread that's in there. So we're just going to make an overhand knot, which is basically a half hitch. Pull that through, take the two ends of the cord, and we're just going to pull it tight and pull that knot right up against the pearl. Don't pull it too tight or you could interfere with your gimp connection, but you can see we've got a knot right there on the first pearl. And I've left enough space here that we can now take our needle and we'll run it through the second pearl. Let me get down to the end here. Push it through, grab the thread. Now, whether you're doing a necklace or a bracelet, this would be the same. We'd just be dealing with a lot more thread that we're pulling through. And I let my thread get twisted. There we go. Now all we do is just pull the two threads and just pull that tight so that the pearl is tight up against the knot. And then we're going to tie another overhand knot between these last two pearls. Pull the thread through, pull the knot down up against the pearl, and then just pull it tight. So we've got two decent knots there. Let's go through the third one. I once had somebody commission me to do a 36-inch long necklace, and there was just thread everywhere. I will never do that ever again. All right, we pulled it through the third. Now we have a choice here. We can do the overhand knot again, or we can just proceed with my traditional knotting, but I think I'm going to go ahead and do one more knot. And we'll pull it tight. And I'm going to get rid of this tail. Now, if you were using silk, you would just have to cut it. But I've got my brand new thread burner. This is a fun thread burner. It's called an Echo Kai, and it's the first rechargeable one that I've ever come across. Usually I have to replace the batteries, and I hate replacing batteries. And it is hot, as I just found out. So we've cut the thread, and then I like to come in and just kind of melt the stub down. So we'll set that aside. So now we've got three. And again, this is how you would start most any necklace or bracelet. And so now we're just going to go to the traditional knotting. And this is how knotting was done for millennia. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our first pearl on. Let me get one that's more of an even shape. and we're going to pull that down right up against the other pearls. And now what we're going to be doing, there's a lot of tools and different things out there and methods that people use with needles and tweezers and all sorts of things. And I just knew there had to be a better way because there always seemed to be a gap. And so I'm going to teach you my way. There's probably close to a dozen different ways to knot pearls, but I believe this is the traditional way of knotting without using tools. And what I do is I take the strand of pearls and I lay them over 3 fingers, and then with my other hand I grab the finished pearls and I pull them up underneath and drop them through this hole that I have created. And so I've got a little triangle here that I've created, and I keep my hands, you can see, facing up. And the trick to this is tension. I am pulling it tight, which keeps that thread up against the pearl, and it also keeps the pearls tight together, but I can move it. Whoops, slipped out. Let's do it again, pulled a little too hard. But you can see again, I've got the 3 fingers, I've got an opening, I drop the strand of pearls in there, I apply tension, I bring that knot that we're getting ready to tighten up close. As I get close, I put my, I'm going to release it till I only have my 1 finger there holding it tight, and I put my thumb over the knot and pull it tight. And then real quickly, you can see first off that the knot's right there up against the pearl, but then I take the 2 strands and just give it a little tug. Not too hard, just a little tug to make sure that the knot's there very good. So there we are. There's our first traditional knot right there, and it is tight against the top. Let's show you again. Let's take our next pearl, we've got the needle, and thread the pearl on, pull it all the way down so it's up against the others. I'm laying the thread across these fingers. I've got my hand facing up, you see. And then I take this strand of pearls with the other hand, just the first 2 fingers, and I drop it down through the hole. This basically creates an overhand knot. And then I apply tension and pull it down. And then as it gets close, I'll put my thumb over the knot, release all but my index finger, which is still, you can see it's got tension. Hold that knot firmly down on the pearl and pull it tight. And you can see the knot is right there on top of the pearl. But just to make sure, we'll pull it tight. Show you a 3rd time and then we will just go on. Thread the pearl on. Bring it down. Pull it tight. Got the thread over my hand. I'm forming a triangle loop. Drop the pearls down, then we just apply tension. Get it up close. Put my thumb on top of the pearls. You see I'm holding the strand with the extra fingers down there too. And then while I'm holding my thumb right on the knot, we just pull it through. And there we are. Perfect knot. Pull it tight. And now we just keep going. I used to think that this was just something I could do automatically. I mean, Debbie makes jewelry while watching TV. I decided I could do that too for knotting pearls and found out, no, I can't. I made mistakes. Pull it tight. This, it's interesting because up until the invention of beading wire, Almost all bracelets were done with some sort of a thread, the higher quality with silk thread, of course, but also cotton. And when synthetics came along, they made it a little easier and cheaper also, I'm sure. But it was, I guess it was the Soflex company in the late 1980s or early 1990s that came up with the multi-strand flexible wire that had a nylon coating so that the wire would not cut through the beads or the pearls. And so then everything changed. But still, traditionally, your high quality, all your pearl necklaces and some of your other high quality gemstone necklaces are still done on thread. Let's get a few more pearls out here. And though I really like working with silk, when I'm teaching, this seems to be a little easier for beginners. And since I found out that all the bead companies that sold thread were just repurposing fishing line, I went and found out that, whoops, get that one over. I went out and found out which fishing lines seemed to work the best for pearl knotting. There we go. Keep the tension on, bring it up close, put your thumb on top, hold that pearl with your extra fingers, and then just pull the knot in. Now, one thing I need to mention is we need to take 3 pearls and set them aside for when we're finishing up, because we're going to finish up in a similar manner to how we started. And this is also a good time to kind of see, how many pearls we're doing to 1 inch, and so how many pearls we're going to need total. And it looks like we're getting just under 3 pearls to 1 inch. And remember, I wanted the actual pearl section to be about 6 3/4. And so when we get to just under 6 inches, we'll need to stop, and then we'll add those 3 pearls and we'll do the finishing. So let's just keep going. Now you also notice that maybe you notice the end of my needle is starting to get all kind of bent up. And if it becomes a problem, you can just take a pair of cutters or scissors and just cut the bent part off. But at this point, it isn't an issue, so I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, it's interesting. I started knotting pearls. We were doing a trade show with our kids, trying to help them make some money for Christmas. And Debbie was selling pearls in our booth, and somebody came up and said, "Oh, you've got pearls?" She says, "Yes." And I says, "I'd really like a couple of necklaces." And she says, "Well, we can sell you the pearls." She says, "Well, can you string them?" And she says, "Sure." And then she quoted them a ridiculously low price for the necklaces, which the lady just went, quickly says, "Yes, yes, yes, here's the money." Which when we got home, I think we lost money on that, but we had never strung pearls before. This was early in the YouTube days, and there weren't a lot of instructional videos on there. And the only thing we could find was, the tweezer or, scratch-all needle method, which is we're knotting the pearls. We just didn't get a good tight knot. There was space. And so Debbie took 1 strand and I took 1 strand, and we each made a necklace. We found out about the French wire gimp bullion, picked up some. We found some silk thread. And then I proceeded to search everywhere I could find to find out what the traditional, I just couldn't believe that this needle method was the only way, or the tweezer method. And so I managed to find one YouTube video that was not an instructional video. It was just a woman somewhere in, on the Polynesian islands who was making a Tahitian pearl necklace, beautiful pearls. And she was using the same technique that I'm showing you right now, but it went so quick. It was just a little short video. I slowed it way down, and then I got to where I figured I can do this. And then at that particular time, I was working in a hospital, and I had a certain amount of free time on the shift that I was working. And so I brought a strand of shell pearls with me and my silk to work, along with scissors and needles and everything else. And then anytime I had free time, I knotted pearls. And people would come into the break room and see me making these neat looking necklaces, and I'd finish them up. And they'd go, "Ooh, that's pretty. What are you going to do with it?" And I'd pull out my cutters and I would cut all the knots out and destroy the necklace and then do it again. And I did this over and over again about a dozen times till I figured I had it down to where I could make necklaces and also possibly even teach it. And I remember the very first class I taught had quite a few people there, but we were making necklaces and nobody finished their necklace after 2 hours. So after that, we started doing bracelets. I could get the bracelets done with the people within that period of time usually. And people get, time is a factor for everybody. And, people are good for an hour or two at working at something like that, but after that amount of time, mistakes start getting made. So we switched over to bracelets. Oh, by the way, the lady was really happy with her 2 necklaces. My wife had given them this price because she figured she didn't have a lot of money. And we went over to drop them off at her house, and I swear the front door on her house was the same size as my garage door. Okay, we're looking at about 4, not quite 4 3/4 inches. And so we need to do a couple more inches of pearls here. And then we'll be all done. Well, we'll be able to finish up. I think we're going to put some kits onto our website for those of you who might want to give this a try. And we'll include the thread. We'll throw in a couple of needles because I know you're going to drop the first one and it'll be gone. And we'll give you a couple of inches of the gimp, which when I'm out in public I call it French wire just because that sounds fancier, but I'm here with friends, so we'll call it gimp. And bullion sounds like something you use to make soup. Now you see that our strand's getting longer, and so it's getting a little more cumbersome to drop it through the loop, and so you just kind of do it in sections. But the basics, once you get it through there, it's all the same. Now there is another method that I don't do very often. I mean, I know how to do it. Some people call it the cheat method, but I've noticed that over in the Orient, if you go into a shop that sells pearls, just by the strand, not as a necklace, they will sometimes offer to make the necklace for you, and they will use this method to knot. And maybe next week I will show you how to make a necklace using this other method. It's a little easier for some people. It's easier to get the knots where they need to go. It's not traditional by any means, but it looks the same. And I think I've seen people do like malas. Get a few more pearls here. So if you'd be interested in seeing this other method, just let me know down in the comments. And I'll see if we can put something together, maybe with a different type of pearl. The other thing that I did in the classes was I didn't use a potato pearl like this. I used a rice pearl, which is longer, and so you didn't need as many pearls. So again, the project went faster, but we were a little short on rice pearls. Right, keep that tension on there till the last possible minute. And I really haven't been checking like I need to between each one, but you can see those look pretty good to me. It's into 6 inches. I think 3 more pearls may do it. Actually, let's do 1 more pearl and then we'll pull the 3 in. The end of my needle's getting really bent up. Let's see. I don't want it to be too long. Debbie doesn't like her bracelets too loose. Anyway, I'm going to put 1, 2, and then 3. Anyway, in this kit, we would include a clasp. Give you about twice as much thread. Probably give you about 2 yards of thread. And a couple of needles, the clasp. And that should be enough for you to make 1 bracelet with room for mistakes. Okay, I've got my gimp. I've got the 3 wires, or the 3 beads there on the end that have not been knotted. And here's where we need a straight needle, but let's see if I can get it in there. Sometimes there's a little piece of wire that will block the end, but there we go. You can see I've got that on the end. We let that drop down next to the thread. Now I'm going to grab that between my thumb and finger and squeeze it tight, and then pull the needle so that the gimp goes onto the thread. You see that right there. And I had plenty of thread here left over. I probably didn't need to do quite that much. Now before it gets onto the bead, we're going to pull the other half of the toggle and thread the needle through. And we're going to run the needle back through this first pearl until we've got the, grab that needle. Let's get these other pearls out of the way. I like to keep the toggle pretty close to on the gimp. And we want to keep the pearls keep them close together. And so I'm going to take this gimp now and bring it down so that it's up against the pearl. Bring the clasp over so that it's on the gimp. And then let's pull that thread. So that we form our little loop. Let's get it tight so that both ends of the gimp are down, and we don't want any extra space between the pearls either. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tie an overhand knot between the first two, or I guess the last two pearls. Pull that tight. And then we're going to go through. We're going to have to bend this down so that we can see the hole. This is why you want a tiny, tiny needle. I'm going to push this needle through that little tiny gap till it comes out over here. Pull that tight, and then we're going to tie another overhand knot. There between the second and third. Now we're going to take the needle, going to pull it down so we can see the hole, and take that needle through that little gap in the hole and push it through till it just comes out. Now see, this is where, I can grab this with my finger, but if you've got your chain nose pliers, you can reach in there and grab the end of the needle. And there's not a lot of space there, but here comes the thread. And pull that tight. Now we already have a knot there, and so we don't need to tie another one. So I'm going to use, if you were using silk thread, you could use the burner and cut it, but then you'd probably want to put a little bit of glue in there. But I've got a synthetic. So I'm going to pull this tight and make sure you don't cut the wrong thread. I'm trying not to burn myself. There we go. And that, I will take this little thread burner and we'll just bring that down so that we don't have a frayed end. And there we have it. The necklace is finished. Hey Debbie, yeah. I need a wrist. Like I says, we'll put a complete kit together, and I'll put the link down in the description for those of you who'd like to try it. We'll use the same set of pearls right here. I made this earlier with the blue thread, and you can see that's a little bit bigger, but not quite the luster. Let's bring you in, Debbie. Down a tiny bit. There we go. All done. Too loose?
A little.
Eat more. You tell people if it's too tight, you Just diet. If it's too loose, you need to eat more. All right. 2 different examples. We'll put both colors of thread available as options, or white, of course, down in the description. And if we appreciate it, if you would hit the like, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell to get any notifications of future ones. If you'd be interested in seeing this other method for doing a necklace, just say so down in the description. In the meantime, we look forward to seeing you again and appreciate you coming today. Thank you and bye-bye.